welcome to Words Carry Us, an ongoing series of live stream events featuring readings and interviews from Greenkill in Kingston, New York. I'm Betty MacDonald, writer, storyteller, and host of Words Carry Us. Before I introduce our guest tonight, I'd like to begin the evening reading from some of my work. Oops. This is called The Artist Approached Her. The artist approached her on West 10th, just east of 6th Avenue, in a friendly, non-threatening way. He remarked on how the poncho she was wearing alternately defined and concealed her body. He was intrigued and implored her to pose for him. Would she come to his studio on Henry Street? 22, new to the city, she was flattered at being noticed and too naive to feel any danger. Maybe, she said cautiously. The next day, she sent a note to the address he had given her. I can't come today, but next week, possibly. He responded, amazed she was literate. Apparently, her note revealed her intellectually beyond what he had admired of her in the poncho. When she finally agreed to pose, he was disappointed. She refused to take her clothes off. As he painted her long, languid body, she was recognizable in broad brushstrokes. He let out his unique style was a joy to watch. After a few moments of concentrated work, he let out a whoop and pushed his feet against the floor, his chair careening backwards on two wooden rails for 5 or 6 feet, in order for him to get a better look at the painting. Then, dragging his chair back with his feet, he approached the easel and took up his brush again. Later, when he spoke to her, his breath was labored and caught trembling in his throat. She hadn't meant to turn him on. He was old, a lot older than the boy she knew. After a few sessions of his urging her to take her clothes off, she ran away. She doesn't know if he finished the painting. She doesn't remember his name. This piece is Wild Thing. I'm standing on the dock feeding the fish. Romeo, a goose that hangs around the pond several weeks every spring, floats placidly by, watching me. Juliet, his mate, is missing. Every year, the same pair of geese arrive on the pond in early May. They come every day in the morning and leave sometime in the afternoon. They swim gracefully around and stand meditatively on the shore. When I hear the racket of their calls, I'm drawn to the window to watch. One day, alerted by his persistent plaintive call, I catch sight of Romeo walking up and down next to the pond, mournfully calling. At one point, in mid-call, he flies up to the roof of the house. From the rooftop, he stands still, calling. There is no answering call. After hours of agitated searching, he calms down. Then he begins following me whenever I'm outdoors. I like his company, and I'm attached to him in a scary, wild way. I believe he's attached to me in a scary, wild way. We adapt to each other. He waits in the driveway for me to come out in the morning. If he gets tired of waiting, he walks up to the door and peers through the glass. As we approach each other, he opens his beak, displays its bright scarlet interior. His pointed tongue lolls out. He makes a soft hissing sound. I'm excited and scared, so close to wildness. Then one day, I'm on the dock feeding the fish. He swims nearby, lingering. He watches me. A moment later, he launches himself straight up into the air on his powerful wings. Suddenly, he's suspended directly in front of me, so close I could have touched him. For a moment, we are eye to eye. For a moment, I'm in his thrall, mesmerized. I am Lita, confronted by the swan. Suddenly, aware of the strength of his wings, his sharp beak, a scream rips from me unbidden. He drops back into the pond, unsure of what just happened. I speak to him softly from the dock. He floats in front of me, keeping his distance. This one's called The Exit Sign is Out of Order. I awaken to find my depression lifting. Slivers of darkness exit my being. The process of abandoning this murky pit has begun. A glimmer of change titillates me with this offer. I don't have to remain in this bleak cell of my imagination where the exit sign is out of order. And here's one last one. These long COVID days. These long COVID days, I could have gotten more done. Alas, I didn't try. No closet cleaning or organizing my files. I didn't want to. I didn't bake bread, and repulsed by sourdough starter, I ordered takeout. I have a wonderful guest to introduce to you now. Mark Morganstern is tonight's guest on Words Carry Us live stream. Mark studied at Manhattan School of Music, played bass fiddle, and toured with jazz and classical ensembles before deciding that music was not the best choice of professions. An avid reader and writer, he switched majors and graduated from the City University of New York with an MA in English creative writing. His fiction has appeared in countless literary reviews, magazines, and journals, and in the anthology Tribute to Orpheus, too. His story collection, Dancing with Dasein, his novel, The Joppenberg Jump, and in addition to his new book, The House of the Seven Heavens, are available from booksellers everywhere. I'm delighted to welcome Mark Morganstern back to Words Carry Us. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Betty. Good to be back with you.
It's lovely to have you here, and I'm wondering if you would like to start off by reading something.
I will.
From your new book.
I'll do that. I'll read a short scene from the first piece in the book, which is a novella for which the book is named for The House of the Seven Heavens. And I'm going to kind of drop you into the middle of the scene because I think people will understand what they hear. The protagonist is a young girl, an immigrant girl named Devora, and she's running through the neighborhood to find her father, Ivan, who's at the Friday evening prayers at the synagogue. She ran through the neighborhood. She had to find Ivan. She entered the synagogue, quickly covering her head. Instead of going directly up to the balcony, she disobeyed the Machitza law and that men and women should be separated, and went straight to the main floor of the sanctuary and stood beside him. The other men, bent in prayer, made audible gasps and moved away from her. They stared disapprovingly. "You are not supposed to be here," Ivan whispered. "Papa, I belong here as much as any of them," she said, referring to the affronted crowd that had gathered in the aisle. "I came to pray with you." She pressed on and said the prayers and resuscitations with as much authority as any of the others, and in flawless Hebrew that astonished Ivan. He hadn't realized that she had retained so much. The men had stopped davening, and the sanctuary became silent, except for one voice. The rabbi turned to see where the female voice was coming from. Devor finished the prayer and waited in silence. The rabbi's eyes widened. He spoke to the men in a hushed voice and then retreated to an anteroom where the worshippers followed him. Ivan and Devor remained seated. She noticed a tremor in his hands, his veins pulsing as he grasped the bench before him. His jaw was clenched. This was not what she'd intended. She had infuriated him. Finally, he stood and exited abruptly. She followed him for a few blocks, afraid to approach him. He stopped at Erie Boulevard and waited for the cars to pass, the late afternoon traffic competitive and impatient. She caught up and stood beside him. He stood erect and unapproachable, his bird-like head movements glancing left and right at the traffic, waiting for a safe moment. He must have been livid with her. When it was time to cross the wide street, she felt something touch her hand. It was his. He'd taken hold of her hand, as he had when she was a little girl walking home with him from shul. Without looking at her, he continued to hold her hand firmly, but not too firm, as they walked back to the house. And in those moments, her heart filled. He'd accepted her finally, as his child, his equal adult child, a simple gesture, an embrace with just a hand that would last her for a lifetime.
Thank you, Mark. Now, that titled story of your book follows an immigrant family who make their home in Schenectady. And with his fierce dedication, the patriarch, and the devotion of his wife and some of his children, he's able to establish a foothold in this country. Is the story based on your own family's history?
It is, but also fictionalized. We lived, as a young child, we lived for a period of time in my grandmother's house on Broadway in Schenectady, New York. And we were actually within sight of the General Electric plant. And we could see the big circular sign with the cursive letters GE fading in and out of the neighborhood.
And did that sign come to mean something to you as a child?
Yes, oppression, for one, corporate greed, misbehavior, and kind of a big brother type of thing.
So it had many roles in your life.
It did. And it fascinated me too.
In what way?
It was huge. You could see that sign a mile away from the facility, and the people who worked there, we'd see them walking through the neighborhoods, their heads down, working their shifts, coming in and out of the place. And I knew even as a child, it was not necessarily a happy thing.
Your description of the sign makes it so real to me that I see it.
A little bit of research there,
Say more about that.
a lot of research.
Oh, okay.
I found out how many light bulbs, 25 light bulbs, 25 watt light bulbs it took to light that thing up.
But more than 25.
Quite a few.
Well, they made the light bulbs.
That's where it came from, huh?
How do you decide what you want to write about?
That's a good question. I usually have an idea of what I'd like to write about. I don't know how I'm going to do it. I knew I wanted to write about Schenectady and the time I spent there. And I knew I wanted to write about my mother, who I gave the name Devora in this story. And then, as you well know, the work of sitting there and word by word creating it and bringing it to life, hopefully.
Well, you certainly brought the people in that story to life. And do you, when you finish, you finished this book, are you already working on another one? Or are you playing with ideas already? Do you have something just waiting to take off at this point?
I didn't have anything ready. When you finish a book with a publisher, there's a lot of preparation and things to be done afterward, setting up readings, and all of that kind of stuff. So in a sense, it can be a little daunting to go back in and start again. And it's like, oh, I'm here again with the one word, starting from the beginning. I did start something. I am working on it, and it's been very slow going, but that's pretty much how I work.
That you work slowly.
I work painfully slowly.
And is it painful, or do you find joy in the work?
Yes, I do find joy in the work, especially when it's coming along. If you work on something long enough, occasionally you get lucky, something or someone throws you a bone, and it gets you to the next place you need to go.
And those bone throwers are characters in your book?
Well, yeah, they say follow your characters.
So you've quoted George Saunders as saying, we writers are basically professional receptors of gifts given by the subconscious. And I wondered if your subconscious is always available to bestow gifts to write about.
I do subscribe to what George Saunders said, that we are writers, basically recipients of gifts from the subconscious. And I think a lot of writers would agree with that. As you're working through something and you get done with your workday, I feel there's a process that continues in the subconscious, and when you come back, you may be ready to put down the next thing. Now, it's a halting process. I highly admire those writers who can outline 12 chapters and write a book. I wish I could do that. But
I think you're doing fine with the process you're into.
Thank you.
Would you like to read some more?
Sure. Let's see here. Okay, this is from a short story called The Gay 70s. And I'm just going to read the first page. Ken often reflected on a line from a Simon and Garfunkel song. How terribly strange to be 70, and stranger still to be 74, he thought. He and his buddies were careening through that precarious decade that often eliminates players by the dozen. Ken wrote in his journal, "Death is an exacting referee who can sideline you permanently at any point in the game, even if you're winning." Ken and the guys met most Friday evenings at the local pub, Simoon's Oasis, formerly a rowdy bar called Golden Mugs and Sassy Shots, a favorite with the biker community until it was sold to a Jordanian woman named Sabah. Sabah's last name was Simoon, hence Simoon's Oasis. She switched up the burger, pulled pork, grilled cheese, fries, and onion rings menus and introduced them to the likes of tofu banh mi and Mediterranean chickpea salad. She also added kombucha on tap, but fortunately kept a good few ales and IPAs on the beer lines. In retaliation, the bikers revved their engines in front of the place on the day of her grand opening and then evaporated like a mirage. Word got back that they'd relocated a couple of towns away and held their gatherings at a venerable roadhouse called Gale's Bottom Feeder, a.k.a. the Feeder.
And I read that you say your writing is your letter to the world. And I wondered in what way that was true for you.
Well, you know who we're borrowing from there? Emily Dickinson. I mean, that was her letter to the world. I think each of us as writers give what we have to the world. It's our letter, our attempt at communication and connection.
And how was it for you giving up your musical career to become a writer? Was that a difficult choice?
It was very difficult. It was very difficult. My family was not pleased with that decision. They thought it was rash. It was very difficult in that, saying that I've decided I'm going to follow writing, and there was a lot of head wagging and saying, "Oh, really? Well, good luck with that too." But I was freelancing in New York. I remember around the time this record came out called "Return to Forever" with Chick Corea, and I remember listening to Stanley Clarke playing the bass, and I just had this awakening, like, that's not going to be me. And I figured I'd just wind up playing, bar mitzvahs on Long Island.
So there didn't seem to be a real space for you to go forward into as a musician.
Well, the good thing about it is I can write about music in my stories and bring it into that. And I do have some knowledge of it, having spent time in a chamber orchestra and jazz ensembles. So I've been very lucky, and I did get to work with some wonderful people.
And do you still play music?
I do not.
You don't?
I do not.
No.
I listen to music.
But you listen and write about it.
If it comes up in a story, yes, I do. I'm kind of fond of throwing in an occasional singer-songwriter of various qualities.
Can you read a little more from
Sure.
the book?
I'll give you another one. Let's see here. Okay, again, I'm just going to throw you into the middle of something. It's the last piece in the book. It's a novella, and it's called A Factotum in the Land of Palms. And it's about an ex-Florida real estate agent who was selling horrible, terrible homes down in the Nome de Plume basin in Florida. And the real estate, the houses were basically sinking into a swamp. And he needs to break away from that. And he finds himself with an old friend who's not really a friend in Southern California. And a lot goes on, but to make it to the point, we're going to read. Okay, we're going to read from here. And Again, it's out of context, but when you have something that long, it's difficult to put it into it. I figured they were listening to our call. I probably shouldn't give my location, but they know my location from my cell. There was no getting away from these guys. It occurred to me that I should have gone on Google Maps and assessed location, allow location access. I could have set it on never. Too late for that. It wouldn't have even have worked. Don't come. You should go home. It's over for us. It's over for my family. Suddenly the cell went dead. The bastards were listening. They cut her off, or she cut me off. It was a 44-minute drive from Vista to La Jolla. Not enough time to think about what I was doing. And what did I think I was going to do? Any vestige of the power and authority that Dr. Van Tragen saw in me had melted in sweat on the car seat. It was dripping down my forehead, into my eyes, and distorting my vision. The only thought I could formulate was that Saida was there, she was in trouble, and that's where I was going. I don't know how. Maybe I touched the tuner inadvertently, but the radio popped on, mid-song, a 70s station, Hotel California. I was too far gone to appreciate the irony. The gate was open, rather smashed open, twisted, jutting out like a metal web. The cement lion's head bell was broken in pieces. There were two fully equipped G.I. Joes either side of the guys in suits milling around the grounds. I stopped and waited. One of the suits strolled up to my window. He was rather overweight for what I imagined these athletic guys to be like. His face was red and splotchy. His dark brown eyes sank into doughy cheeks the way raisins sink into a warm pastry. And he was panting like he had just run a 50-yard dash. He placed a meaty hand on the door and said, "This way, Zeutner." He took me in to the two-story building of stone and glass, the email fortress I had seen before. Polizacchio's security guys were hanging out there the first time I visited. Two more guys in suits with short cropped hair and sunglasses stood on either side of the entrance. Inside, the electronics were impressive. They'd installed communications center and a small cafe with an impressive cappuccino machine. It smelled like a Starbucks, but it wasn't about leisurely web serving, lattes, and trying to look like you're writing an award-winning novel. He led me into a small side room where a secretary sat in front of a computer. A microphone was placed on the desk. There was also a camera lens pointed at the chair where I was sitting. A muscular German shepherd sat on the mat in a corner of the room. He lifted his weighty head as I approached, his eyes following my slightest movement. "I'm Agent Cates. This is Miss Blatter." I wasn't about to say pleased to meet you. I nodded. Cates slid his sprawling stomach tight under the desk, which made his neck bulge, and he took out a pocket recorder. Apparently one wasn't enough. "You've been keeping some bad company, Zeutner. You should have stayed with real estate." I still had no adequate response. I just said, "Uh-huh." Kate smiled and slid a Mont Blanc pen out of his shirt pocket. He tapped it on the desk and then pointed at me. "Let me make an analogy. The pot is simmering with a cast of characters. It's loaded with ingredients. Which one are you?" I stared at the guy for a few seconds, confused by his mixed metaphor or whatever it was. I don't know. If I was a gradient, I'd be like oregano. "I would have taken you for cinnamon," he said. Miss Blatter tittered as she typed. Anyway, Zoidner, the pot is about to boil over, and there's going to be some serious scalding if you follow me. That's his run-in with the CIA.
Sounds intriguing.
He has a lot of problems in California.
So much of what you write takes place in the Hudson Valley.
Yes,
And but you grew up in Schenectady.
I did, the Hudson Valley.
And
Yeah.
you grew up here as well.
Yeah, yes. Even as a child, we lived in Kingston for a while, and mostly Schenectady, Plattsburgh for a while. But I'm from the Electric City, for what it's worth.
The electric from the Electric City.
That's what it's called.
Were you a creative child? Did you study music? Were you a writer as a child?
Oh, that's a difficult question because I have to tell the truth.
Uh-oh.
I was not.
You were.
I was considered to be learning disabled. I failed third grade because they didn't think I could read.
You were dyslexic?
Well, I was something.
They didn't have that in those days.
No, we didn't have the luxury of having a name for those difficulties. And I almost didn't even get out of high school.
Wow.
I didn't start doing things until I was lucky enough to get into the North Carolina School of the Arts, where I studied the double bass and spent a lot of time in the theater department, fascinated by the productions. And
So you were drawn to the arts.
I was drawn to theater. I was drawn to writing, even while I was trying to be a qualified orchestra musician. So there was a bit of schizophrenia there going back and forth, which made it difficult.
And you've written plays as well.
I have written a series of one-act plays, several of which we did here, thanks to David, who was very welcoming.
You did your plays at Greenkill.
Yes.
How interesting. I didn't know. So you weren't focused on being a musician or a writer until you got to college.
Well, I started playing the bass in high school, and I was in the high school orchestra, and I auditioned, and a very fine musician who came through town I played for, and fortunately for me, he got me into the college. But there was so much more there than just the music. There was a very highly developed dance department. We had choreographers and famous dancers coming up and down from the city, from New York City, and directors coming from New York to direct plays, and they did a lot of productions. It was a great time.
What is it about the Hudson Valley that draws you to write stories about it
Well,
or to live here?
I guess that's because that's where I started. That's where I've spent so much time. I remember when T.C. Boyle put out his short story collection, If the River Was Whiskey, and I was trying to write about the Hudson Valley, and I thought, okay, I think he covered it pretty much, but I just kept going because that's all you can do.
So you've been writing for a while, for a long time.
Yeah, and yes, and I think too, even way back in college, as a musician, I was writing in my head, but wasn't completely aware of it.
Right, but
until
the stories were going in your
So
head.
there were stories or descriptions,
Right.
and they would be verbal, and then later on I started putting them down on the page. It's been a while.
So, is there anything that I'm leaving out? Haven't I missed anything that you'd like to speak about?
I think you've covered it pretty well.
Well, how about taking us out with one more reading?
Okay, let's see what we have here. Did I pick one more reading?
Well, I see four
What do we have
markers on your
here?
book.
Well, okay, I think what I'll do, I had read an excerpt just now, a factotum in the land of palms, and I'll just read the first page of it as
Okay.
perhaps a little teaser. It gives you a sense of the character, Zeutner, where he's coming from, and the changes that are going to come abruptly into his life. I realized much later that it was the universe trying to get my attention. That's why I lost the most lucrative job of my lifetime. Here in Florida, sitting on top of the Nome de Plume Basin, we were enjoying a real estate boom unlike anything other in the country. I had been fortunate to be a top sales rep for the Ray Shaft Wanger Real Estate Agency here in the Sunshine State. I had closed deals on 17 homes in our new enclave, Elite Estates, where comfort and security thrive and exclusivity reigns. In private, we agents referred to the place as Seersucker Acres. Bring your wading boots, y'all. 4 of the houses I had sold had recently sunk several inches into the non-existent swamp. But hey, not my problem. Caveat emptor. I just sell them. I don't guarantee they'll float. I very much regret that cavalier attitude now, having experienced a severe financial downturn and multiple hardships, some of them of a bizarre and nightmarish nature. I've learned a serious lesson in humility. At least I got to keep my vintage forest green MG midget, only because it was already paid for and it gets good mileage. But eventually, I parted with that as well.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Betty.
It's a pleasure to hear you read, and what a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Tonight's guest on Words Carry Us from Greenkill has been Mark Morganstern, author of the House of the Seven Heavens. Currently featured at Greenkill, Vito DeSalvo's work will be on exhibition through Saturday, December 31st. Exhibition hours are from 3 to 5:30 p.m., Tuesday through Saturday. Special appointments are available by calling 347-689-2323. Located at 229 Greenkill Avenue in Kingston, New York, Greenkill is a public arts performance and education space. For more information about exhibitions as well as live stream and live audience events, email us at 229greenkill@greenkill.org. As always, we are grateful to David Schell, who organizes, directs, and makes things happen here at Greenkill. Our thanks go to Shirley Hoffman-Warren, who composed and performed our musical theme, and thanks to recording engineer Jason Warren. Many thanks to you for tuning in and for watching us on YouTube. And very special thanks to tonight's in-studio audience. Our guest tonight for Words Carry Us live stream from Greenkill has been Mark Morganstern, author of The House of the Seven Heavens. Thanks to you for tuning in and for finding us on Greenkill Sessions on YouTube. I hope you've enjoyed Words Carry Us for December 18th, 2022. Happy Hanukkah, best of holiday greetings, and the best and most joyous New Year. I'm Betty MacDonald, your host. Greenkill out.